I think it was unpopular with the cancer industry, but that's basically kind of what you called it, was like an industry and profits. And it went with my line of thinking, because personally I believe the cure for cancer is sitting in some kid's basement in the glebe. Personally, I think it's a big business. But anyway, it was...
Well, that was the sort of stuff that we did, yeah. It was interesting because the battle there at the time, because we were an FM rock station, nobody would take the newsroom seriously. Like, you were just considered, oh yeah, you guys are just, you're just going to do news about drugs. That's what people thought, right? And so we set out to prove them wrong, and we did. We had our own reporter on Parliament Hill as part of the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Mm-hmm. We had our own reporter at City Hall, full-time reporter, a guy named Sam Rainboth, who's out west now. He's a great reporter. These guys were good. Peter Leo, who went to the CBC, he was our parliamentary guy. John Krupe, who was and still is, he's ill right now, but the assignment guy at CTV Ottawa, formerly CJOH, he was our parliamentary guy after Peter left to go to the CBC. We did a really good job for a very small newsroom, and then we got national radio awards. I mean, we proved our worth. Mm-hmm. I was really proud of that place. We did a really good job.
Yeah, and it sounded good. It was very professional, and I know it was primarily a mainstream rock station, but it had these elements that took it out of that league. Yeah. Temporarily, at least, including your show. So after Shea, I guess you moved on to CPAC in some.
No, I actually I left Shea. I was syndicating for a year. I was syndicating Medium Rare, the show that I did on Sunday night, and it was syndicated to like 5 or 6 stations across the country. Again, the only reason that I could get away with that was because the CRTC still had this spoken word requirement for FM stations. And then in early to mid 1992, I think, they dropped that requirement. And as soon as they did, poof. Everybody dropped me. Man. So that was it. And I was out of work.
We'll fill that with mainstream rock music.
Yeah. So I walked away from that. I did a little.
So far, we're going to have to update this Wikipedia page in more than just one area. Okay, then CPAC.
No, then CBC Television.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, I spent some time working at the Red Cross as a writer, mm-hmm. and then I got approached by a CBC Television producer named Janet Evans, wonderful, lovely woman, and there was a half hour available. Locally, 7 o'clock on Monday nights, and so we did this show called Rockburn and Company, and we did profiles of creative people, and we were quite creative with the word creative. Mm-hmm. These were not just singers and writers, but designers and chefs and anybody who was doing anything in the creative field. And it was a really innovative show because it was just me talking to these people in situ in their studios or whatever. But usually in 3 or 4 different locations, and there was no voiceover narration. There was nothing. It all had to fit together organically. It was really cool. Mm-hmm. We did that for 3 years, I guess, and then again, the CBC decided they would take that half hour away from the regional stations, and suddenly that was gone. And that's when I got hired at CBC Radio to do All in the Day, the afternoon program.
Do you feel you look good on TV?
God, no. And it's funny that you should ask me about this because literally in the last couple of days, I have purchased a video capture program for my computer, and I have all the old VHS tapes of those things, so I'm digitizing some of them. Mm-hmm. Boy, nothing will make your skin crawl faster than looking at yourself 25 years ago.
It hurts.
It really does.
Does it really add 10 pounds to your body?
No,
too?
Actually, I look thinner. That's the only part of it I like.
What do you think was your best gig? Because now you're retired and you're just walking a dog, apparently.
I am. The best gig, I think... well, there were, I would say 2. At Shea, when I was doing Medium Rare, because that was the 2 hours a week that was just mine. I got to do whatever I wanted, and I loved it. It was great. And I've always really liked radio.
Did you do your own research or have a little team?
No, it was just me.
All you?
It was all me.
Okay.
Yeah. And I had contributors. I had people who come in as contributors, right? So doing different things, and some of them were funny, and some of them were serious, and then there were a lot of interviews and that sort of stuff. So that was a lot of fun. But the last 6 years at CPAC was probably the best gig anybody could have. I was just given free rein. I was allowed to
come and go.
I never had to go into an office. I never had to go into a studio.
Oh.
I got to interview whoever I wanted, as long as they were willing to talk to me. I got to travel all over North America with the same 3 guys in my crew, a producer and 2 shooters, friends of mine. And when you're on the road that much, you get real tight. So we traveled for 6 years. We traveled all over North America. We talked to the coolest people, And we'd come back, and my producer would take this stuff off, and it would be edited together. We'd shoot over the winter, and then they'd run these shows. We'd do 12 of them. They run them in the summer when the House of Commons isn't sitting. And then after that, they repeat them ad nauseum. And they just finished on New Year's. It was called Rockburn Presents. They did this Rockburn Presents marathon. So it was like 24 hours of these interviews back to back.
It's still on. It still appears in my menu sometimes. It's like he's retired.
Yeah, no. They'll never be. I won't be doing them, but they'll still be on.
Did you get to see them after they were edited, or watch them when they were watched? Or when they were on?
I pretty much saw them when they were on. I trusted Dan and our editor Glenn. They always did a good job, and yeah.
Okay.
So they were.
We're going to take a break,
okay,
and then we'll actually talk about
the book.
Part of the reason you're here is
sure.
your book. It's been getting a lot of there's a lot of reviews. A lot of people are talking about it. It took way too long to make.
It did,
but we'll talk about that when we're back. It's currently 8:28. We're in the studio with Ken Rockburn. He is, as you heard, a Canadian radio and television journalist and host, and he's most notable for his associations with CPAC, CBC, and Shea. Stick around. We'll be back in just a few seconds. 8:30. We're back in the studio with Ken Rockburn, and now we're going to talk about your book.
Okay.
We are. Oh, I can't read.
We are as the times are.
We are as the times are.
Yeah.
It's about a hippie place on on Sussex Drive.
I guess you could say that, though. It's sort of pre-hippie actually, because it started in 1960, so more like beatnik.
So. It took way too long for this book.
Yeah,
right?
it did. It was. It took me about 8 years to do it, but there were all kinds of reasons for it. I mean, for one thing, I did probably 85 to 90 interviews, I guess, and actually, and technically, probably more than that, because a number of them were people that I talked to on several occasions. So, William Hawkins, for example, whose first line of his song "Gnostic Serenade" is the title of the book. I talked to Bill many times, because every time I talked to him, he would remember something else, right? So it actually ended up being more than that. So you have all these interviews, but they have to be transcribed, like you're recording these people over lunch.
Right.
And so you have to sit down and transcribe them all.
Who does that? Do you do that?
I did that. Okay. Yeah, it was just me, baby. I'm telling you. It was
okay.
a lot of work. So you put all this stuff together, and then you've got it all, and then you have to figure out, what kind of form you're going to put it in. Mm-hmm. And originally, my idea was to do it as a kind of oral history, a kind of Studs Terkel-like thing, where it would just be these chunks of dialogue. There was a book like that called Baby, Let Me Follow You Down. I'm trying to remember the names of the guys who did it. One of them was a musician, and they elude me at the moment because it's early on a Wednesday morning in the dead of winter. But nonetheless,
don't give me that.
Okay.
You were a cab driver.
I know. Well, I didn't say I was a successful
man.
Yeah, and they did a book about the Cambridge folk years, and it was very much like that. So there would just be little linkages between these big chunks of spoken word of memories from the people who were there, and that was how I wanted to do it. Once I started down that road, I realized how difficult that was going to be, because, again, you're having lunch with people while you're interviewing them, and everything is broken up, and there was no coherence to any of this stuff. You couldn't put it together that way. So then I figured, well, I'm going to have to do it as a narrative, and that scared the hell out of me, because I'm not really used to doing that. But I thought, well, maybe I can pull this off. So I started to figure out how to piece it all together, the structure that I wanted to have, to do it chronologically. I made a list of the various chapters that I thought would be good, related to different aspects of this club, and did that. And of course, I'm working full time at the same time, right? So you're trying to do all this while you're holding down a full-time job and everything else, and a family, and then my wife got ill, and that was for 2 years. She was sick for a year. I didn't work on it at all, and then she passed away. And then for a year after that, in fact, I didn't think I'd get back to it at all, ever. And then I finally did. And when I did, the dam broke, and I actually finished it in
record time.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Full steam ahead.
Yeah, and I got it done.
You were born and raised, I assume,
born and
in
raised
Ottawa.
Here. Yeah.
What hospital?
Civic.
I'm going to get personal. And what area? What street?
I lived on Main Street.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
I lived on Main Street, right down by the canal.
Now, how did you find out about Cafe Hibou or its predecessors? Because it was actually in two other locations before it went to Sussex.
I found out about it when it was on Bank Street, the second location. It started out on Rideau Street, but it was only there for less than a year. And then Denny Faulkner was the founder. He was the guy who thought it up. He had a couple of friends who were in on it with him, but essentially it was his idea. It was there for less than a year, so I'd say in early '61 it moved to Bank Street. I'm trying to remember the address now. It's in the book. I'd have to look, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, Bank Street, and it was upstairs above a Randall's Paints, I believe it was at the time. And that was when I learned about it. And that would have been, first time I went was in 1963. I went to see John Hammond Jr. play, and I've told this story many times, but I had a date, and the club then, it was a long, thin, dark room. And Hammond was on stage, and my friends and I were big John Hammond fans. And he was playing, and then he finished his first set, and he put his guitar down, and he stepped off the stage, which was essentially just a riser. And he walked the length of the room, and he sat down at my table and started hitting on my date. And I was conflicted. Should I be mad at him for hitting on my date, or should I be really pleased that John Hammond is sitting at my table? And I chose the latter. So
Did you get lucky that night?
No. I was 16, man. Come on. So anyway, it was that was the first time I went, and that was how and we learned about it because we were into folk music at the time. We'd started listening to Dylan. 62,
well, this 63. Is what I don't get. You're only like 16, and you're into folk. Why?
Yeah, because
most people were into mainstream stuff.
Well,
how did you get out of the mainstream?
Well, my oldest friend
pocket?
Paul, who was the one who actually was suggested this book to begin with, the kernel of the idea came from him. He had gone with his parents to Florida for a vacation, and he was very much into. He went to Carleton too, at the same time as I did later on, but he was very much into the civil rights movement and everything. He was very interested in that sort of stuff. And on one of these trips, he started reading his sister's, I think it was 17 magazine. And in 17 magazine, there was a story about this young musician called Bob Dylan, believe it or not. And while he was in the States, he bought the first album. And he came back with it. And I remember the two of us sitting down and listening to it and going, oh, my God, this guy is incredible. And that was the beginning of it.
That's the game
changer.
And
then we just started. Then it was like, then it starts to expand. Then you learn about Woody Guthrie and Lead Belly. And then you start buying Ramblin' Jack Elliott albums. And then suddenly there are all these white boys doing it. There's John Hammond, there's Tom Rush, there's all these guys. And the next thing you know, you're wearing a jean jacket and rolling your own cigarettes with one hand and looking for cowboy boots.
It's funny. And I heard something, I'll just have you recall it. Who is the best Ottawa band in your opinion?
The best Ottawa band?
Yeah, ever.
Heaven's Radio.
Yeah, that's what you said.
Yeah, no question.
Terry Gillespie.
Yeah.
I met him a couple of years ago. I went out to his place in Van Cleek Hill.
Terry's in the book.
Oh, is he?
Oh, yes, indeed.
I guess
there's a great Terry story in the book.
You must have talked about him or talked to him for a while, too.
Oh, yes, indeed. Yeah.
Ian Tamblyn was a player there.
Yep.
This is before Ian Tamblyn was Ian Tamblyn?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. He was just a young guy. The guys who hung out there, Chopper McKinnon,
right.
Chopper spent a lot of time there. Bob Stark, Bob Soucy, all these guys were,
Never made any money, though, the place.
It never made any money for anybody. Denny Faulkner had it. He kept at it until 1968. So he was there for all three moves. So it went from Rideau Street, then it went to Bank Street. It was in Bank Street until 1965. In 1965, it moved to its final location on Sussex Drive. And it was there until it closed in 1975. But in 1968... Denny had become a producer at CBC. He had a new family, and it was just too much for him. And all that time and all that work and all that blood, sweat, and tears and everything, he never made a penny. So he sold it to a guy named John Russo, and he and his wife Joan ran it for 4 years. And then they sold it to Pierre-Paul Lafreniere and Daphne Burks. They were the final owners. And then in 1975... they got beaten up by the National Capital Commission and it went out of business.
Well, which confused me as to, I can get Rideau Street in a house and I can get the Bank Street upstairs, but Rideau Street, even 40 years ago, was, upscale to some
this
degree.
Was way down. This is down by Friel, and
right.
it was a house. And they were on the second floor. It was an apartment, basically.
Right.
That's all it was.
No, but the place on Sussex.
Oh, on Sussex. Oh, it was a...
So I'm saying to myself, the rent would have been high, but there was an NCC deal.
No, the rent wasn't high then. It wasn't what it ultimately became. They were paying $450 a month rent for the space. And in 1975, the new head of the NCC, a guy named Edgar Gallant, he had come from, I think he was Treasury Board, and he'd come to the NCC, and he was a real bottom line kind of guy. And he was the guy that laid down the law. He wanted them to be, market driven. And this is a club that, they had what was referred to as the squeeze juice bar in it that was run by another guy. Was a separate operation kind of, and they made food, but not a lot of food. But then they booked all these acts, and they had to pay these acts.